these Japanese are like 97 grave sites here, and nobody really paid any attention to them at all until about the 1990s, when this man in Japan, he was an elementary school principal, he retired, and he decided that he wanted to tell his family about their ancestors. Trouble was, he couldn't find anything about his grandfather. So he started going through some papers, and he found some letters that his grandfather had written. Turns out that his grandfather had married into a prosperous Japanese family, but his grandfather had also gambled away a lot of their property. So he went to, he knew that he had to kind of get that money back, so he went off to America. And between 1880 and 1920, there were 2,000 Japanese people came to Montana to work, a lot of them, and they didn't speak English, so they went to a company in San Francisco that found them jobs in the agriculture, railroad, mining, lumber, whatever. So he got a job as a cook with the railroad outside of Butte, and he did that for several years. And in a letter he wrote back to his wife, he said that the food he was eating was like upper class food in Japan, and he said the amenities here were just marvelous, and he there's no comparison between Japan and the United States. So he's obviously happy to be here, since it was independence anyway. And he also got a letter that said that his grandfather had died in Missoula, Montana. Well, his grandfather was a cook with a railroad outside of Butte, and he got ill one time, and he wanted to go back to Japan. So he got on the railroad, came to Missoula, where he was very ill, and he went into the hospital, and he died 24 days later. So his grandson found a letter that said he died in Missoula, Montana. Well, his grandson couldn't find Missoula on the map, and so he went to the Japanese embassy in Seattle. They couldn't find Missoula, so they went to the Mansfield Center at the university, and they couldn't find Missoula either. But they went to Helena and looked and found his name and learned that he had died in Missoula, Montana. So they came out here and looked and found this gravesite. So they sent the information to the grandson, and he came here to bless it, which is something that the Buddhist religion is important that you do that. So he came here and he saw these other grave sites. There are 97 Japanese grave sites here. They didn't all die in Missoula. They came from other towns too, but they're all buried right in this area. So he wrote down the names, and he went back to Japan, and he got some stories in the newspapers, and some of the relatives contacted him, and they wanted to come here and bless their graves too. So about 2 years later, he came back with all these people and some Buddhist monks from Denver, and they put a white carnation and joss sticks on each of the grave sites, blessing them. And they were just amazed at how well cared for these grave sites were, because these were here, you know, in the early 1900s, and they went through World War II, and they still maintained them. And they said, you know, in Japan, a foreigner, if no one knew about it, they would just let it go, not keep it up or anything. So they were just tickled pink with how well cared for these were. And the railroad workers had a deal with the railroad that if they died here, they would put up a gravestone for them. They're little clubs that they belong to, and they'd have the English and the Japanese writing on them. Well, the people in Montana don't exactly know Japanese all that well, so no one knew quite what they said, but about 5 or 6 years or so ago, a Japanese couple came through, and they went through and translated, and most of the writing tells where they're from in Japan and what club they belong to. That was sort of a social thing, I guess. So they got that information. And his grandson put this little plaque right here honoring it, and they were just super pleased. Other Japanese come here and visit when they're around, and they are also just so pleased at how well cared for these sites are. So it's kind of a nice little deal. So.